In 2015, Melissa Nicole Lindgren was accused of abusing multiple students over a 2-year period while working as a junior high school math teacher for the Fullerton, California School District. The then 29-year-old was originally charged with 10 felonies, carrying a potential 16-year prison sentence, but she pleaded guilty to 3 charges and was sentenced to more than 4 years in prison. Families of 5 victims sued the school district in civil court for failing to protect the students from their predatory teacher. A district spokesperson claimed that school officials responded to the abuse allegations very quickly, appropriately, and with the maximum allowable transparency. Attorney John Manley, who represented 3 of the victims' families, told the Orange County Register that the school district had been about as transparent as the Catholic Church has been about priest abuse. In early 2017, the district agreed to pay $4.5 million in settlements, with $3.25 million going to 3 of the victims and $1.25 million going to 2 other victims. Number 22. Rogers Ruiz. In early 2024, 45-year-old Rogers Ruiz was arrested on suspicion of stealing jail materials and selling them for profit while working as a facilities technician for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in Florida. According to authorities, the employee of more than 5 years unlawfully removed goods from a storage room at one of the county's jails, then took the items to a scrap metal facility and exchanged them for cash. In total, he was accused of stealing 210 pounds of copper and 183 pounds of yellow brass with an estimated collective value of over $3,000. Ruiz was charged with multiple crimes including grand theft, dealing in stolen property, and false information on a pawnbroker form. At the time of his arrest, the Sheriff's Public Affairs Office announced that additional charges may be forthcoming. The agency has not issued any updates since then, leaving the current status of the case unclear. Number 21. Thieving TJ Maxx trio. Over an 8-month period in 2019, thousands of dollars worth of merchandise vanished from a TJ Maxx store in Idaho Falls, Idaho. The loss prevention manager assigned to the district eventually discovered that the disappearing inventory was being stolen in a coordinated scam that was being carried out by 3 employees. During the time period in question, 18-year-old Lisette Galvin, 20-year-old Sonia Castro, and 19-year-old Hangel Cisneros Ambers would void certain items while ringing each other out at the register. Based on law enforcement's calculations, the trio were responsible for at least $6,000 worth of missing merchandise. During questioning, all 3 suspects admitted to their involvement in the theft. They were initially charged with felony grand theft, but after considering their young age and lack of priors, prosecutors agreed to reduce the charges to misdemeanor petty theft. Galvin Castro and Cisneros Ambas all received suspended prison sentences along with 1 year of probation. They were also given the opportunity to have their convictions wiped from their record as long as they completed their probation successfully. Number 20. Brutal barroom beatdown. In December of 2023, Memphis police responded to a reported assault at Mugshot's Bar and Grill. Upon arriving at the scene, an officer spoke with a waitress who claimed that she had been assaulted by the bar's manager, Shariva Dorch, and 3 of her co-workers. The victim told police that the altercation started with her talking to Dorch's ex-boyfriend, sparking an argument between the employee and Dorch. Staff members Arlena Fox, Nyla Fields, and Kaylin Williams, and several others were accused of attacking the waitress from behind on Dorch's behalf and stealing her house and car keys. According to arrest reports, the suspects also punched, kicked, and stomped on the victim until she fell unconscious. She was taken to a local hospital with numerous injuries, including 2 black eyes and multiple cuts and bruises. Dorch, Fox, Fields, and Williams bonded out of jail after being booked into custody on aggravated assault charges. None of them lost their jobs because the incident conveniently occurred on the establishment's last day of business before shuttering its doors. The status of the case is unclear. Number 19. Daycare Fight Club. In a disturbing case out of Newberry County, South Carolina, that made national news headlines in November 2023. 56-year-old Serena Caldwell and 27-year-old Erica Jones were accused of encouraging young children to fight each other while working at a Columbia daycare. The disturbing allegations came to light after other staff members viewed security footage and reported their suspicions to law enforcement. According to investigators, Caldwell and Jones instructed toddlers to shove, pull, and hit each other, pitting the kids against each other as a type of sporting event. The pair were immediately fired from their jobs and subsequently arrested on suspicion of contributing to the delinquency of a minor and unlawful conduct to a child. Jones was charged with 14 counts of each crime, while Caldwell faces 15 counts each. They were released on bond amounts ranging from $56,000 and $60,000. Thankfully, none of the victims were seriously injured, but the extent of the mental and emotional trauma they may suffer as a result of the mistreatment remains to be seen. After announcing the arrests of Jones and Caldwell, authorities clarified that the daycare's owner and other employees had been cleared of any wrongdoing. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Number 18. Bazen Berhe. During what began as a normal workday at a Target store in Bailey's Crossroads, Virginia, in April 2021, an employee in his early 20s fatally attacked a janitor more than 2.5 times his age. The disgruntled worker, Bazen Berhe, ambushed his 58-year-old co-worker, Hernandez, with knives and a hammer over suspicions that the victim had stolen his lunch a few days earlier. Following his arrest on suspicion of first-degree murder, Berhe told detectives that he bought the murder weapons at his workplace on the same day he began to suspect Leva of stealing his food. He spent the next day training for murder, then waited for the victim in the store's parking lot the following morning. When Leva arrived at the store for his shift, Berhe charged at him with the weapons in hand, giving him little to no opportunity to run away. The deranged killer beat and stabbed Leva, then fled the scene on foot. Berhe returned to the store a short while later and surrendered to responding police officers. He confessed to the crime immediately and pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder charge in October 2023. During his sentencing hearing, Berhe told the court that he would hurt or kill more people if he ever had the opportunity, prompting the judge to impose the harshest possible punishment of 100 years in prison. Number 17. Joshua Schiano. During a night out drinking in Clay, New York, in June of 2023, 22-year-old Madison Faltisco realized that her co-worker and designated driver, 23-year-old Joshua Schiano, was in no condition to get behind the wheel. She refused to get into his car and began walking after failing to find another way home. Early the next morning, a passing motorist spotted Faltisco's lifeless body along the roadside and called the police. She had been struck by a vehicle several hours earlier. Shortly after Faltisco began walking home from the bar the previous night, Schiano had crashed his car into a Salvation Army thrift store sign less than a mile, 1.6 kilometers away from where the young woman's body was found. Schiano walked away from the wreck largely unscathed, despite his car bursting into flames. He had failed to mention anything about striking Faltisco, but given the proximity between the accident scene and the location of her body, investigators began to suspect that he was responsible for his friend's death. During questioning, Schiano denied any memory of committing the tragic hit and run. It's possible that he truly didn't remember the incident, considering the fact that his blood alcohol content was more than 5 times the legal limit, but that didn't make him any less responsible for the crime in the eyes of prosecutors. In December 2023, Schiano pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated vehicular homicide. He was sentenced to a prison term of 4 to 12 years. While handing down the punishment, Judge Gordon Cuffey said that he hoped Schiano's situation would cause others to stop and think twice before driving drunk. Number 16. Out-of-control fast food brawl. When Richard Forte noticed how long the drive-through line was at a Popeyes restaurant in Milwaukee, one night in November 2019, he decided to park and place his order inside. Upon entering the restaurant, he quickly noticed that there were a lot of employees working at the time. Just moments later, a fight broke out between at least 7 workers, prompting Forte to pull out his phone and hit the record button. In the video, both male and female staff members could be seen hitting each other and fighting on the floor while a fellow employee tried to break the fight up. Forte stuck around long enough to capture the alarming incident on video, but never ended up getting his food. By the time police arrived at the restaurant, the altercation had calmed down. No arrests were made, but all 7 workers involved in the brawl were promptly fired. Number 15. Aaron Siebers. 27-year-old Aaron Siebers of Denver, Colorado, was skateboarding in his blockbuster uniform one day in 2009 when he fell and ripped his only pair of work khakis. He was scheduled to work that evening and became worried that he would be written up for wearing the wrong pants. But he also didn't want to call in sick, so he stabbed himself in the leg, stomach and face, then entered the store and claimed he had just been attacked. Siebers told his supervisor that 3 Hispanic men had approached him on a nearby bike path and demanded his wallet, and that the men stabbed him when he refused to hand it over. He claimed that he broke free from his attackers and ran to his workplace. The police were called and Siebers was taken to the hospital where doctors stitched up his leg wound. Based on his account of where the incident occurred, investigators determined that the suspects would have had to walk past a Target store in order to reach the location. But the store's surveillance footage only showed Siebers coming and going, with nobody else headed in that direction before he re-emerged with his injuries. In the video, Siebers could be seen walking behind the Target and limping back into view a few minutes later. Police found a bloody serrated knife in his backpack, furthering their suspicions that he had caused his own injuries. He eventually admitted to lying about the attack and was charged with misdemeanor obstruction and false reporting. The outcome of the case is unclear. Number 14. Ernesto Hernandez Avalos. In early 2007, 45-year-old Woo Song Park hired a young day laborer named Ernesto Hernandez Avalos to do some work on his home in Rancho Santa Margarita, California. Avalos had worked for Park in the past as a landscaper, and they seemed to have a decent relationship, but something went terribly wrong this time around, and Avalos bludgeoned Park to death with a shovel in his boss's backyard. Park had repeatedly complained that Avalos wasn't working fast enough and that he smelled bad. During questioning, Avalos admitted that he had taken methamphetamine that morning and that he had been using the drug regularly for about a year. He was charged with Park's murder but pleaded not guilty and took the case to trial. Despite all signs pointing toward Avalos losing his temper and bludgeoning Park to death, the accused killer's attorney argued that Avalos had acted in self-defense. According to the defense, Park had threatened Avalos with a tool, prompting the terrified worker to react in fear for his life. A responding officer told a much different story on the stand, claiming that he saw Avalos deliver a final blow to Park's head even after Park had become unresponsive. Park also had no defensive wounds, indicating that he didn't even have a chance to fight for his life before he was knocked unconscious. The jury found Avalos guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison. Number 13. Andy Brown. Andy James Brown lost his license to work as a certified public accountant in 2005 after being convicted of embezzlement. Despite his checkered past, he managed to score an accounting job with a firm owned by David Losey in Sturgis, Michigan. In October of 2013, 70-year-old Losey was found dead on the floor of his office with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. Police soon discovered that he had gotten into a heated argument with 37-year-old Brown the day before his body was discovered. Based on their findings, investigators theorized that Brown had started embezzling from Losey and that Losey had confronted him about it. Brown denied murdering his boss, claiming he had no reason to do so and that he was grateful to Losey for helping him get his career on track after his previous legal trouble. Prosecutors had little to go on in the way of forensic evidence, but the circumstantial findings were strong enough to convince a jury that Brown was guilty of second-degree murder. He continued to maintain his evidence from behind bars after being sentenced to a prison term of 37.5 to 75 years. And even after he unsuccessfully appealed his case, Brown will be 76 years old when he becomes eligible for parole in 2053. His maximum release date is in the year 2090, which means he could very well end up spending the rest of his life in prison. Number 12. Natavia Lowery. Linda Stein made a name for herself as a go-to realtor for celebrities looking to buy high-end properties in New York City. In 2007, the 62-year-old was found dead in a pool of blood on the floor of her Fifth Avenue apartment by her daughter. She had been bludgeoned in the head at least 24 times, leaving her with a shattered skull and a broken spine. There were no signs of a break-in or a robbery gone wrong, leading investigators to suspect that Stein was killed by someone she knew. Police traced the crime to Stein's personal assistant of 4 months, 27-year-old Natavia Lowery, who began stealing from the realtor almost immediately after she was hired through a temp agency. Surveillance footage showed Lowery arriving at Stein's apartment building in a taxi cab on the day of the murder, which proved that at the very least she had lied to police about walking to the property. During questioning, she gave a number of different stories about what had happened, at one point claiming that a mystery man had beaten Stein to death after ordering Lowery to let him into the apartment. But Lowery was the only person that detectives were able to implicate in the crime, indicating that she acted alone. She eventually confessed to attacking her boss with a yoga stick. Investigators discovered the theft after being tipped off to Stein's suspicions by a friend. Lowery had been opening credit cards in Stein's name, leading police to theorize that Stein had discovered the theft and that Lowery had killed Stein out of fear that she would go to the police. In 2010, a jury found Lowery guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to more than 27 years in prison. In an alarming display of her true colors, the convicted killer grinned remorselessly at Stein's daughters as they read their victim impact statements during the sentencing hearing while smiling warmly at her own family. Lowery will become eligible for parole when she's in her early 50s, but the judge recommended to future parole boards that she remain behind bars for life. Number 11. Jason Duhaime. In October 2022, police responded to a reported explosion at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. The 911 call came from a 45-year-old administrator named Jason Duhaime, who claimed that sharp objects had blasted out of a Pelican case and up his sleeves, injuring his arms. Duhaime also told law enforcement that the case contained a threatening note. Responding officers quickly realized that the details didn't align with the evidence. The case that supposedly exploded was empty and undamaged, and the violent note was nowhere to be found. Duhaime was treated at the hospital for a minor wound, but his injury was inconsistent with what police would expect to find in the type of explosion that he had described. A search of Duhaime's work computer turned up a copy of the so-called threatening note, along with evidence that it was written and printed earlier that day. While the exact details of the note are unclear, police described it as a rambling diatribe about virtual reality and Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. Federal authorities charged Duhaime with intentionally conveying misleading information related to an explosive device and making false statements to law enforcement. In early 2024, court documents revealed that he wants to take the case to trial and that his defense lawyers had dropped him as a client due to non-payment and a breakdown in the attorney-client relationship. The case appears to be ongoing. Number 10. Craig Armstead. In 2006, recent college graduate Kerry Harris moved to Atlanta to work at the Cargill Food Company as a quality assurance manager. She quickly developed a reputation for being polite and professional, keeping her work and personal lives completely separate and staying out of workplace drama. Most of Harris's co-workers respected her boundaries, but a maintenance employee named Craig Armstead seemed overly eager to connect with her. At first, Harris wrote off the man's infatuated gestures as odd but most likely harmless. During that same time period, strange things began happening. Items vanished from Harris's office when she wasn't there, and she experienced unexplained car problems in the parking lot. It seemed like Armstead was always nearby during these bizarre incidents, and like he always magically appeared to save the day whenever an unexpected problem arose. Harris also realized that she was occasionally being followed on her drive home. She began living in constant fear while Armstead continued to overstep her boundaries and showered her with unwanted gifts even after she told him she wasn't interested in dating him. Left with no other choice, Harris began reporting Armstead's behavior to management, who issued him a written warning and told him not to talk to Harris unless it was work-related. But the unwelcome advances continued and little was done to stop Armstead. 2 years after starting her job at Cargill, Harris and a co-worker discovered a hidden camera in the women's bathroom. They turned it over to their superiors, who determined that the device belonged to Armstead. It contained over 1,000 hours of disturbing voyeur footage, and because it was recording when it was discovered, Armstead knew Harris had found it. A few hours later, he stabbed Kerry to death in her office and fled the scene. He was quickly apprehended. Armstead tried to plead insanity, claiming that an evil voice told him to kill Harris. But the court didn't buy it, and he was convicted of murder, aggravated assault, and a weapon charge, along with 18 counts of unlawful eavesdropping and surveillance for the material on the hidden camera. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 60 years. Number 9. Robert Peterson. After going through a contentious divorce in the early 2000s, air traffic controller Gene Thurno moved from Nebraska to Land O'Lakes, Florida, for a fresh start. A few years later, he married his co-worker Juanita, and the couple built their dream home. During that same time period, Thurno's co-worker from Nebraska, Robert Peterson, transferred to the same airport that Thurno was working at. Peterson had previously shown an unusual interest in befriending Thurno, who overlooked numerous red flags and assumed his colleague was strange but harmless. One afternoon in 2006, Peterson insisted on visiting Thurno at his home. Juanita left to run some errands and returned to find a trail of blood leading to a pile of her husband's bloody clothing. Both Thurno and Peterson were soon found dead at Peterson's home. During the investigation that followed, police uncovered disturbing evidence of a years-long obsession that eventually drove Peterson to kill Thurno. It quickly became clear that Peterson had stalked Thurno for years leading up to the murder. He described his feelings for Thurno in a handwritten note that Juanita discovered after the crime, making it clear that his obsession was the product of an unreturned romantic desire. Sadly, instead of recognizing his need for mental help, Peterson eventually snapped and killed Thurno, needlessly ruining multiple other lives in the process. Number 8. Jessica Dayton. While responding to a home in Marengo, Iowa, during the early morning hours in July of 2009, police arrived to find 42-year-old Denise Fry sitting outside covered in blood. Inside the home, officers found the brutally beaten and bludgeoned body of Fry's live-in boyfriend, 33-year-old cafe owner Curtis Bailey. He had been struck in the head between 11 and 30 times. Further investigation led law enforcement to Fry's 19-year-old son, Jacob Hilgendorf, who had a bad relationship with Bailey and was banned from both his home and the cafe. Both Fry and Hilgendorf quickly confessed to participating in Bailey's murder, and Fry even admitted that she had tried to kill Bailey a few days earlier by overdosing him with insulin, but they both blamed Hilgendorf's girlfriend, 20-year-old Jessica Dayton, for delivering a final fatal blow to the back of the victim's head. Dayton worked at Bailey's cafe as a waitress while Fry was employed as a cook. In the days leading up to the murder, the women conspired with Hilgendorf to kill Bailey. The plan was for Dayton and Fry to promise Bailey a threesome and get him blackout drunk, then have Hilgendorf kill him. But things didn't go according to plan, and the suspects wasted no time telling their friends about the situation. Dayton denied any role in the crime, despite being incriminated by both her co-conspirators and the friends she had opened up to about the murder not going as planned. She was tried first in court and was found guilty of first-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence without parole in the state of Iowa. Hilgendorf and Fry were convicted of the same charge and also sentenced to life without parole. They appealed their cases, but the original rulings were upheld. Their exact reasons for killing Bailey remain unclear. Number 7. Kavonn Ingram. Just days after cashing a $7,000 inheritance check in early 2024, 55-year-old Pizza Hut manager Alex Stengel was found murdered in a garbage can outside his workplace in South Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He had been shot and stabbed, and his wallet, keys, and cell phone were missing. A trail of blood led police to the restaurant's kitchen where the murder took place, while surveillance footage pointed toward fellow Pizza Hut employee Kavonn Ingram as the likely killer. According to police, Stengel's murderer had used the restaurant's computer and time management system, indicating that they were familiar with the restaurant's procedures and further pointing toward Ingram's involvement in the crime. A possible motive came to light when a regional manager told investigators that Stengel had showed off a wad of cash in Ingram's presence after cashing his inheritance check. He's now facing charges of first-degree intentional homicide with the use of a dangerous weapon, hiding a corpse, armed robbery, and possession of a firearm by a felon. If convicted of the homicide charge alone, Ingram will face a mandatory life sentence without parole. He pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond while awaiting trial. Number 6. Chu Yen Van Vo. After retiring from his job as an administrator at California State University's Fullerton campus, 57-year-old Stephen Shek Kung Chang returned to work part-time in 2019 to help investigate some suspicious financial activities that had recently been discovered. As he arrived at work one morning in August of that year, he was viciously murdered in a frenzied knife attack in the school's parking lot. A nearby construction worker overheard the commotion and rushed to the scene, where he saw the killer repeatedly stabbing Chan. The killer fled the scene on foot but was quickly identified as 51-year-old university employee Chu Yen Van Vo. He was promptly arrested, but his motive for the crime remained a mystery until he pleaded guilty to Chan's murder in 2023. As it turned out, Vo had stolen over $200,000 from the college by filing fake tutoring invoices, and Chan had been tasked with investigating the financial discrepancies. Chan had reportedly linked the fraudulent activity to Vo, who killed Chan in an attempt to avoid losing his job. Vo's attorney told reporters that his client pleaded guilty to prevent both his and Chan's family from the pain of going through a trial, and because Vo was genuinely remorseful for his actions. After coming to grips with his wrongdoings, he decided to do the right thing and confess. The convicted killer was sentenced to life without parole. Number 5. Lloyd Love Jr. Less than a week after starting his new job as a security guard in August of 2022, 35-year-old Lloyd Love Jr. of Aurora, Colorado, was unable to cash his first paycheck because his name was misspelled on the document. He tore the $165 check to pieces and confronted his boss, 52-year-old Marvin Johnson, and Johnson's wife. Marvin agreed to fix the problem and was in the middle of telling his wife to issue a new paycheck when Love shot him in the head. The disgruntled new hire then called his girlfriend to pick him up and told her he had done something stupid, but refused to go into detail about his actions. Love was initially charged with first-degree murder and held without bail. His sister Tiffany claimed that the shooting never would have happened if the authorities hadn't released Love from custody months earlier when he was arrested for assaulting her. She told local station KDVR that her brother suffered from untreated schizophrenia and that it made him a danger to others. The judge who oversaw the previous case originally set bond at $25,000, which would have kept the homeless man behind bars, according to Tiffany. But Love's defense attorney eventually persuaded the court to release him without bail, even after Tiffany begged the judge to keep her brother locked up due to her fear that he would seriously harm someone. Love's ex-wife, Lisa Theriot, also said that she didn't understand why he was free to commit the crime he was accused of, which cost an innocent person their life. State records show that Love is currently serving a 3-year sentence, but the nature of his conviction is unclear. He becomes eligible for parole in August of 2024 and will remain behind bars no later than May of 2026, unless he catches new charges. Number 4. Jeffrey Johnson. After being laid off from his job as a clothing designer during the summer of 2012 due to the company's decision to downsize, 58-year-old Jeffrey Johnson became hell-bent on getting revenge. He went to his workplace, which was located just down the street from the Empire State Building in Midtown Manhattan, and opened fire on his former co-worker, 41-year-old Steven Ercolino, in broad daylight during the morning rush hour. Johnson pumped 3 bullets into Ercolino, killing him at the scene. He then continued walking down the street while a construction worker alerted the police. When confronted by the officers, Johnson pointed his gun directly at them, prompting the cops to fire 14 shots in self-defense, striking him in the head. He died from his injuries, and at least 9 others were injured by bullets and bullet fragments from the officers' weapons. Witnesses later described the scene as pure chaos, as terrified onlookers ran for safety while those who were struck by the gunfire collapsed on the sidewalk. Given the location, the time of day, and other circumstances surrounding the shooting, people initially feared that the Big Apple had been targeted in an act of terrorism. The FBI quickly ruled this out and determined that Johnson had targeted Ercolino because he blamed his ex-colleague for the loss of his job. Johnson's elderly mother was heartbroken by her son's death, but she told the New York Times that she didn't blame the police for shooting him. She hadn't seen Johnson for over 20 years, but kept in touch with him regularly and struggled to understand what caused his mental state to deteriorate so badly that he ultimately snapped. Shortly before the shooting, Johnson had had a falling out with his mother and was upset over the recent death of his cat, suggesting that the loss of his job served as the catalyst that pushed him over the edge amid a series of unfortunate events in his life. Number 3. Sarah Gonzalez McLin. While performing a welfare check at a Lawrence, Kansas home in January of 2014, police discovered the brutally slain body of 52-year-old pizzeria owner Harold Sasko. He was bound with zip ties and had been nearly decapitated, and the word freedom was scrawled across the wall in his blood. Based on the evidence, investigators concluded that Sasko was most likely drugged and incapacitated at the time of his murder. A few key things were missing from the residence, including Sasko's car, along with his 19-year-old roommate and employee, Sarah Gonzalez McLin, who worked as a waitress at his restaurant. Police had actually been called to the residence by McLin's family, who became concerned about the young woman's well-being after not hearing from her for an unusual length of time. McLin had moved in with Sasko in 2012 during her battle with drug addiction. Her boss hoped that by giving her a safe and stable living environment, he would help her get her life on track. After McLin went missing and Sasko was found dead, police initially believed that the teen had been kidnapped. As the investigation furthered, they began to suspect that McLin had murdered Sasko. Authorities eventually tracked her down near Miami, where she was living out of Sasko's car. During questioning, McLin confessed to murdering Sasko in a premeditated and deliberate fashion. She told investigators that she drugged her boss and initially had second thoughts about killing him after he fell unconscious, but that she ultimately decided to follow through with her sinister plan. Prosecutors charged her with first-degree murder and pursued the death penalty. McLin's defense lawyers argued for reduced culpability based on her mental health, claiming that she suffered from multiple personality and childhood trauma in addition to her struggles with addiction. The jury nevertheless found her guilty, and she was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. In 2021, her sentence was reduced to 25 years. McLin's crime was undeniably horrific, but there are at least two sides to every story. In an opinion piece for the Kansas Reflector, her mother, Michelle Gonzalez, claimed that Sasko was an abuser who routinely forced himself on Sarah, berated her, and made her feel financially trapped. Gonzalez acknowledged the wrongfulness of her daughter's actions, but argued that McLin deserves a new trial and an opportunity to incorporate the abuse into her defense. Sasko's loved ones have insisted that he would never harm someone, but the unfortunate truth is that the world may never know what happened behind closed doors. Today's topic was requested by Topper Thompson 9665 and Bettina Mitchell 3535. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Tyrone Ozen. While working at a solid waste plant in Houston, Texas in 2015, 43-year-old Tyrone Ozen became frustrated because he felt like he was being picked on unfairly. He eventually became fed up and stormed into his boss's office with a gun. Ozen fatally shot 55-year-old Michael Vaughn and was charged with murder. Vaughn's relatives challenged Ozen's claim that he was being made fun of at work. They suspected that the accused killer had become jealous of Vaughn, who had relocated to Houston from Dallas to take over a position that Ozen had held on a temporary basis. The slain supervisor had complained to his family about Ozen's behavior and had even asked his superiors to transfer the problematic employee to a different work location prior to the murder. Vaughn's loved ones also claimed that he wasn't a bully and would never have treated someone the way Ozen had accused him of. In 2019, Ozen pleaded guilty to murdering Vaughn. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Number 1. Randolph Sanders. 56-year-old social worker Kim Jones was listening to gospel music at a Philadelphia bus stop on her way to work in early 2015 when someone shot her in the back of the head execution style. Surveillance footage showed the assassin removing a handgun from a duffel bag, firing the deadly bullet and calmly walking away. Investigators traced the crime to 36-year-old Randolph Sanders, who worked with Jones at a children's non-profit. Jones had recently confronted Sanders about $42,000 in missing funds that he was suspected of stealing from the organization. Sanders initially denied any involvement in the murder. He finally cracked and confessed after more than 30 hours of questioning, admitting to investigators that he had recently been accused of mismanaging the non-profit's money and was afraid that he was going to lose his job. On the morning of her murder, Jones was planning on reporting the stolen funds to the Department of Human Services, which had provided the money to the organization. In early 2017, a jury found Sanders guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be gifted 10 million but still have to work until you are 65, or be gifted 2.5 million and be able to live off it and retire? Let us know in the comments section below.